Coming up, we'll see Hannah's attempt to flirt with a pair of devils.
A victim helping to solve his own murder.
And mushrooms, 5 different ways. Hi, I'm Hannah Flynn, Communications Director.
I'm Stuart Young, Producer and Sound Designer.
I'm Seamus O'Borchlan, Programmer.
And we're here to present to you, as part of the London Games Festival official selection, Mask of the Rose by Failbetter Games.
The only game of the official selection to be set in London.
Let's go then. Mask of the Rose is a romantic visual novel, and it's set in the universe of Fallen London,
where an unknown bargain has dragged London below the earth, and the inhabitants are now figuring out how to live in a large and quite horrendous cavern.
But it's not just something for Fallen London players by any means. If you have an interest in visual novels, we're hoping that this will be a really good example of that.
The player character is thrust into this new world. You're somebody trying to make ends meet. You're living in a lodging house with some other people, and one of them, your friend Grizz, finds you employment with the new masters of the city, these mysterious hooded figures who appear to be in charge. And they employ you as a census taker. They're very interested in information about the residents of the city, ostensibly because they want to know how many mouths there are to feed, for example. But they also seem to have an interest in love stories, which seems a little unconventional.
But if you're interested in interactive fiction more generally, there are some really fascinating interactive fiction mechanics going on that have been brought in fairly subtle ways.
Well, we're about to see the opening of the Mask of the Rose, which takes you through the character creation process, a lot of customization that you can do with the player character. And then after that, we're going to have a little look at the character having a chat with some devils they happen to meet. So we begin with just a little bit of setup about the current situation. This is also might be a way of sort of easing in players who aren't familiar to the city, to the setting.
And this is our destroyed skyline, with this building in the background that has arrived with the fall of London. That's the bazaar, and to a new player, it's probably quite menacing. But what exactly its nature is a big mystery in the game.
So the player chooses a background. You can be anything from an arcane academic we have here to a dock worker or a tailor's child. We're all different social classes.
Yeah, and that will influence the way people look at you, depending on whether you put on your affiliation garments. This is a question of personal address, and the game is like gender agnostic. So as a romance game, it doesn't care what gender you are. The relationships you strike up are not reflected in that at all. You can choose. And here as well, it's a kind of a nod to a reference to the trans experience, because since the fall, so many people have been able to finally act the way they always wanted to act on the surface. And we know that we have a lot of LGBTQIA players who would love to enact some things that are sort of their dreams for themselves and for their characters. So we love to offer them that option. And here we're choosing how much sex we want, how much love we want, whether we want friendship. And I've selected here romance and attraction because I'm just going all in. I'm happy with that.
So because Hannah selected that they were interested in romance and attraction, they're going to, I think we'll see in a moment, we're going to see some outfit items that have been added to their inventory, which will let them interact with other characters in a particularly flirty way. But first here is actually an inventory item you've got, which allows you to be commanding and authoritative and use the legitimacy of the census taking to compel people to give you answers. So we introduce a player pretty early on to the concept of swapping out their outfits. It's very important in the gameplay. It affects what you can do. Here's the mushroom hat that I mentioned. The 2 different versions of that, they do exactly the same thing. They allow you to be flirty and funny with the characters you meet. And I think they're also going to go for the badge of the Ministry of Accounting and Recounting, which is your your sign that you're an official census taker. And because you chose in the character creation to be an arcane academic, you've also got an academic gown, which again gives you options sort of appropriate to that background. So here Grizz acknowledged that you're wearing the census taker's badge, which is really just a way of tutorializing that what you're wearing makes a difference in how characters respond to you. And now the player is picking their sort of standard means of communication, how they choose to address other people in the world. You can be a character who's a bit of a fabulist and makes things up, or you can be a character who's very open with other characters, and or maybe somebody who's very pessimistic. There's lots of different ways to approach it.
Grizz is an example of a woman who was born into society on the surface and wasn't particularly interested in that life of being married off and hosting parties. So since the fall, she has shucked her crinolines and thrown on a waistcoat, and she's doing meaningful work, and it's a lifestyle that really agrees with her.
So Hannah's chosen to flatter Grizz there, and that will affect some of the dialogue options that she gets later with future characters. And we introduce a little bit about the mystery here of who these new masters of London are in quite a subtle way. You know, we want to try and sort of ease new players who might not have played our games before into the weirdness of the setting. So there's a lot of strange stuff going on. So at first we're just sort of hinting at these little mysteries.
This is an option that you won't see in every playthrough, but we've already established that you're kind of a bit light-hearted, so you can tease Grizz at this point.
I think one of the notable things is it doesn't feel like you've made impactful choice so far necessarily the first time you're playing, but it's already working and it's already learning about you and the kind of character you want to be. And there, because we had our badge on, we have that little clothing symbol, we can choose an option to speak in a very commanding, authoritative manner as befitting our badge and our station.
Yeah, we've seen players playing the demo be surprised at how non-linear it is, because in games like this you might make a few choices, but most of the text remains the same normally. But in this, those choices of how you address people really do have a huge impact. If you've ever played the old Telltale games, they used to flash a thing on the screen, a sort of a notice when a character would remember something you'd said, like Clementine will remember that. We don't have that in this game because it would be on almost all the time.
Oh yeah, we had another pageism there, establishmentation. He loves to mess with language.
So it's also a way of introducing the other people living in this lodging house a little bit. You might notice the option there, Inventor Mr. Chapman. That's because earlier I think we'd elected to say that we lie quite a lot, so the character could just make up somebody who doesn't exist at that point.
And that's the first time when I made this video that I saw that option. Mm-hmm. Like, it just keeps giving.
Yeah, but I always play through it quite very honestly, so I'd never seen it before we recorded this either.
Yeah, I can't wait to see people go through it a couple of times and really jive with how different you can play it.
There's just so much stuff in there.
So all of our flirtatious headwear has really paid off, but Archie is going to...
I don't think I've ever gotten that flirtatious with Grizz that early in the game before.
No, I didn't know you could, but here we go. Archie, medical student, didn't quite qualify before the fall, but is now pretty busy helping people.
He's quite a kind character who, is sort of acting like a doctor, even though he didn't even qualify, simply because of the urgency of the situation. But he's also quite dour and pessimistic about himself. He really doesn't like being stuck in this underground cabin, away from all of his relations in Scotland.
Introducing these two right at the beginning is a really nice way of showing how differently people might have responded to the new risks and opportunities that the fall provided. Grizz is in her element, whereas Archie is very much looking back to the surface.
Yeah, for Grizz, it's an opportunity to sort of advance her position as as a working professional. We make a great deal of the fact that this fall, this cataclysm, has resulted in a great deal of social change, and Grizz is an example of that.
Right, and then we have the same character off to see the devils.
So the player is setting off from their attic room here, heading outside, and they select the Devil's Townhouse, which is this sort of proto-embassy that the Devils have set up. Obviously, because we're in this vast underground cavern. Well, what's also underground? Hell is underground. So in our dark fantasy universe, London is right next to hell. We have a little bit of introduction as the player makes their journey towards the townhouse. This sort of helps you give a bit more of a sense of movement to the character and their explorations in London, even though we normally see just these sort of slices, these static scenes. And here they are, our two sort of main devils in this game. We've got Virginia and Milton. The player was wearing their census taker badge at this point, so you can see actually the characters directly respond to that fact and notice your badge. So they already know exactly what you're there to do.
We should say a little bit about the sound in this location because it's particularly juicy.
Oh yeah, so one of the things that the devils in Fallen London like to do is collect people's souls, of course. I mean, they are devils after all, and they store these in those glass bottles that you can see on the top right of the screen. So the sound of this location involves sort of whispering voices of the souls coming out of those bottles, which gives it sort of a really creepy ambiance. And it's combined with some music. We've been working with a composer, Lawrence Chapman, who has created a score which sort of reflects each location and character. So here, the Devils kind of have a sort of jazzy, kind of almost 1920s gangster sort of feel to them, which sort of captures their intoxicating romance and glamour, but also their menace at the same time.
Here we are collecting some census information. Ideally, you would complete a census sheet for every character and then hand it in to Mr. Pages. That's kind of the occupation of the demo and the first act of the game. Collecting this information, getting paid by Pages. You mentioned at the beginning you haven't had any money and combine a few months. And it enables you to develop your own relationship through conversation with this master of London, Mr. Pages, who is this huge, cloaked, menacing figure who you haven't really understood to this point. And that's your kind of chief occupation until you find something else to occupy yourself, which is writing love stories and crafting murder mystery theories.
Something that's worth pointing out about the art for the Devils is that in the Fallen London universe, the Devils don't play by quite the same rules of time as everybody else. In Fallen London, they're about 20 years ahead in the future to the 1920s, but when we designed the artwork for these two, they've got a more Edwardian look because they're sort of 30 years ahead of everybody else. It's a nice little touch, I think.
There's some other little...
Sorry, Stuart.
Oh, I was just going to say there's some other little art touches that players of our previous game might recognise here, such as Milton's type-in and the symbols on the boards to the left are very significant runes that have been introduced in some of our other games.
We should talk a little bit about the dynamic lighting in the scene as well.
Yes, yeah. As the characters move, you'll notice that there are some rim lighting textures that we've added that were intended to ground the characters in the scenes in a way that hints at sort of a third dimension without actually building a three-dimensional game.
Yeah, it's very subtle, but it really does. When you sort of see the version with just the plain 2D art versus the lighting, the characters immediately feel more present and more part of the scene.
Milton here is being lit from his left by some red lights in the background.
So we're getting on really well with the devils here. They are telling stories, and we're just flirting our chops off with both of them as we can.
Just some extremely skillful play on your part, Hannah, because Virginia is just the worst. She's so hard to get along with.
She's very prickly. The player, if you choose unwisely by complete accident, she can just storm out of this scene, and you're left talking to Milton for the rest of it.
I've never made her do that. I didn't.
Really? Every time.
No. Oh no, I get on really well with Virginia.
Well, the player inadvertently can bring up some bad memories for her, which cause her to storm off in a huff and slam the door. Milton is a lot more friendly. Well, I'm not sure friendly is quite the word, but ostensibly friendly anyway.
He's a bit more up on the current London life. Virginia is a little bit more removed and has
He's literally younger. He's meant to be a younger devil who's a bit more sort of hep to what the humans are doing.
And he's connected in some fashion, romantically, maybe on one side, but maybe not on his, to Rachel, another of the characters in the game, who's an author who's been using Milton's literary salon as kind of inspiration for her works. And this is just a tiny glimpse at the parlour of your boarding house with a stew of some type on the table. Food is not bountiful underneath. Everything is largely mushroom focused. But poor Horatia has managed somehow to put another warm meal on the table for you. Well, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to find out more about Mask of the Rose, you can look on our Steam page on failbettergames.com, or you can follow us on Twitter at Failbetter Games. We hope you'll take a look at it. Thank you so much for London Games Festival for giving us this opportunity, and we will see you in Fall in London. Bye!